When the empath finally decides to step back, everything begins to shift. For years, the narcissist has been comfortable, almost certain of their place, because the empath gave them constant reflection, attention, patience, and a kind of unearned loyalty. The empath plays the role of healer, listener, and supporter, and the narcissist grows used to it. They expect it. But what happens when the empath simply stops participating? The entire stage begins to collapse because the performance was only ever possible with an audience. The narcissist is often driven by a hunger for recognition, admiration, and control. They are not sustained by quiet solitude or inner strength the way an empath can be. They are sustained by the reactions of others. Without that source of energy, their confidence begins to crack. It isn't obvious at first. At the beginning, they might mask the loss with anger, with dismissal, with an attempt to belittle the empath into coming back. Yet behind that reaction is panic, because they are losing the mirror that once defined them. The empath, by contrast, is experiencing a new kind of freedom. They begin to see that their compassion does not require constant sacrifice. Their worth is not measured by how much they can endure or how much mistreatment they can tolerate in the name of peace. Instead, they realize that stepping away is not cruelty, but self-preservation. That shift is powerful because it exposes the imbalance that had been hidden for so long. And so the narcissist changes, but not in the way one might expect. They may become louder, more dramatic, more insistent. They may accuse the empath of betrayal or claim victimhood, or rush to find another person to fill the role. But deep down, something more troubling is happening. They are forced to face themselves. The mirror is gone, and now they are alone with their own reflection, one they do not like to see. For the empath, this is a moment of clarity. They notice that their strength is not in carrying someone else's weight endlessly, but in knowing when to set it down. The silence after the storm is not emptiness. It is space for healing, for self-discovery, and for growth. And as the empath grows, the narcissist feels smaller because control is slipping from their grasp. This dynamic reveals something profound about human nature. When one person thrives on giving and another thrives on taking, the relationship is never truly balanced. It can appear stable for years, even decades, but only because one side sacrifices more than the other. The moment that sacrifice ends, the illusion breaks. That breaking is painful for the narcissist because it exposes just how dependent they were. It is equally painful for the empath, but in a different way, because they realize how much of themselves they lost in the process. But here lies the hidden transformation. The empath begins to rebuild not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. They recognize that compassion must include themselves, not just others. They find strength in boundaries, not weakness. The narcissist, meanwhile, often spirals, searching desperately for another empath to step into the role. Yet each new connection becomes weaker, because once the illusion is seen, it is harder to sustain. Jordan Peterson often speaks about responsibility, about the need to carry one's burden with dignity. The narcissist, when stripped of the empath's support, is confronted with their own responsibility for the first time. They may reject it, they may rage against it, but they cannot avoid it. And in that struggle lies the chance, however small, for real change. Few take it because it requires humility. But for those who do, the absence of the empath becomes the beginning of self-awareness. Meanwhile, the empath does not harden into coldness as some fear. Instead, they learn discernment. They begin to see that kindness without limits is not kindness at all. It becomes enabling. True compassion is measured, wise, and balanced. And when the empath carries this new understanding into future relationships, they no longer attract the same patterns. They stand taller, speak clearer, and no longer feel guilty for saying no. So who does the narcissist become when the empath stops playing along? They become exposed. They become restless, desperate, sometimes vindictive, sometimes pitiful. They become a person stripped of their borrowed identity, forced to face a self they can no longer deny. And who does the empath become? Someone stronger, someone freer, someone who has finally learned that caring for others must never come at the cost of abandoning oneself. The story is not just about conflict, it is about awakening. The empath awakens to their own power, and the narcissist awakens to their own emptiness. And from there, two very different paths unfold. When the empath withdraws their energy, the narcissist often reacts in ways that reveal more than years of behavior ever could. Their identity has been constructed like a house of mirrors, fragile, dependent on reflections that were never truly theirs. Without the empath, the scaffolding begins to crumble, and this collapse can take several forms. Some narcissists lash out, becoming louder, more aggressive, and more insistent. Others collapse inward, portraying themselves as victims in a desperate attempt to pull the empath back. Both responses share one thing in common: they show the inability to stand alone. For years, the empath had been the steady source of emotional fuel. They absorbed criticism, endured manipulation, and offered understanding even when none was given in return. But now, when silence replaces reassurance, the narcissist is confronted with a void they cannot escape. This void is terrifying because it represents the absence of control. The empath was not only a source of validation, but also a shield against the narcissist's own hidden insecurities. Without that shield, those insecurities surface with unrelenting force. The empath, however, is not simply walking away in anger. Their decision comes after a long inner journey. At first, they may have tried harder, given more, explained more clearly, hoping that patience and kindness would bridge the gap. When that failed, they realized that continuing to pour themselves into emptiness was not healing but draining. This realization brings both grief and relief. Grief, because they see how much of their time and energy was given without return. Relief, because they understand they are no longer bound to a cycle of imbalance. What happens next is a study in contrasts. The narcissist, left without their main supply, often tries to replace the empath quickly. They may find another person, another audience, another listener. On the surface, this may appear successful, but deep down, the substitute never feels the same. Why? Because the empath was not just passive fuel, they were genuine. Their compassion was real, their loyalty steady, their presence grounding. That kind of authenticity cannot be easily replicated, and the narcissist knows it. This awareness haunts them, even as they deny it. The empath, in the meantime, experiences growth in unexpected ways. Stepping back gives them time to rediscover who they are without the constant demand to manage someone else's emotions. They reconnect with their own creativity, passions, and inner peace. For some, it feels like waking from a long sleep. They realize how much they had dimmed their own light to keep someone else comfortable. Now, with space, their inner world flourishes. But the deeper transformation lies in what each learns, or refuses to learn. The narcissist, if unwilling to face themselves, becomes a wanderer, moving from one source to another, never satisfied, always hungry. Their patterns repeat because they never stop to ask the hard questions. Why do I need constant validation? Why do I fear silence? Why do I avoid responsibility for my own flaws? Without those questions, they remain trapped in their own cycle. The empath, however, begins to see patterns too, but with clarity. They see why they were drawn into the dynamic in the first place. Perhaps they confused endurance with love or sacrifice with strength. Perhaps they believed that if they gave enough, they would finally receive in return. Whatever the reason, the recognition breaks the old cycle. With this awareness, the empath gains not bitterness, but wisdom. They learn to set boundaries, not walls. They learn to say yes when it is true, and no when it is necessary. This shift does not go unnoticed by the narcissist. Often, they sense the change and attempt to regain control. They may promise change, express regret, or offer sudden affection. Yet, for the empath who has truly awakened, these gestures feel hollow. They no longer hear only the words. They see the patterns beneath them. And once seen, the illusion cannot be unseen. Jordan Peterson often emphasizes the importance of order and responsibility. In this context, the empath learns that responsibility must be balanced. It is not their role to carry the weight of another's denial. It is not their duty to fix what the other refuses to face. Their responsibility lies first in themselves, in ensuring they are living truthfully, not in enabling someone else's illusions. The narcissist stripped of their old anchor, faces a choice. Some double down, seeking another empath to replace the old one. Others retreat into bitterness, blaming the world for their loneliness. But a rare few confront the reality. They must build their identity not on borrowed admiration, but on real growth. This is the hardest path because it requires humility, self-examination, and discipline. Yet it is the only path that leads to genuine transformation. For the empath, the journey forward is brighter. They discover that compassion, when wisely guided, does not weaken but strengthens them. They understand that they can care deeply without losing themselves. And in future relationships, they bring a new kind of presence, one that is generous but firm, warm but self-respecting. This new balance not only protects them, but also invites healthier connections, because people who thrive on mutual respect are drawn to that strength. In the end, the dynamic between empath and narcissist becomes a lesson about boundaries, identity, and growth. When the empath stops playing along, the narcissist is forced into a confrontation with their own emptiness. They may resist, deny, or flee, but the truth remains. And the empath, by stepping away, not only protects themselves, but also reclaims the life they were meant to live. So the question is not only who the narcissist becomes, but who the empath becomes. One is left clinging to illusions, the other rising into authenticity. The separation reveals the true character of both, and in that revelation lies both loss and liberation. When the empath finally breaks free and refuses to serve as the silent support system, the narcissist's world changes in ways they never anticipated. What once felt like certainty, having someone always available, always forgiving, always listening, suddenly vanishes. For the first time, the narcissist is confronted with the reality that people are not infinite wells of attention. This realization shakes the very foundation of their identity, because without the empath, they are forced to face a silence they had long avoided. This silence is not just the absence of noise. It is the absence of validation, admiration, and reaction. For the narcissist, silence feels like suffocation. They may respond by creating chaos, stirring drama, or inventing stories just to fill the emptiness. But none of it works the same way as before. The empath, who once played the role of emotional caretaker, no longer entertains the performance. The stage is dark, the audience gone, and the narcissist voice echoes into nothingness. The empath, on the other hand, experiences the silence differently. To them, silence is not emptiness. It is rest. It is the first breath after years of shallow breathing. They begin to notice the small joys that had been drowned out. Peace in quiet mornings, the freedom to make choices without criticism, the return of inner confidence. They rediscover what it means to exist without constantly adjusting themselves to someone else's moods. What once felt like losing someone now begins to feel like regaining themselves. The transformation is profound. The empath realizes that they were never weak for caring, but they were mistaken for believing that care must come without limits. This understanding reframes their past. They see that their giving was not the problem, but the lack of balance was. With this clarity, they no longer feel trapped by guilt or obligation. They see compassion as a gift to be shared wisely, not a currency to be exploited. Meanwhile, the narcissist begins to unravel. Deprived of the empath's stabilizing presence, they often swing between two extremes: aggression and despair. In aggression, they may try to pull the empath back with accusations or grand gestures. In despair, they may sink into feelings of emptiness, loneliness, and even self-pity. Both reactions stem from the same core truth: they cannot sustain themselves without external affirmation. And while they may attempt to replace the empath quickly, every substitute feels shallow in comparison. The authenticity the empath brought cannot be mimicked, because it was rooted in genuine care. This realization sometimes drives the narcissist into deeper patterns of denial, but it also holds the rare possibility of awakening. Stripped of external fuel, they are left with only themselves. For many, this is unbearable, but for a few, it is the first step towards self-examination. They may begin to see that the constant hunger for control and admiration is not strength, but weakness. If faced with honesty, this can be the beginning of growth. But honesty is rare, and few take that path willingly. The empath, however, does not wait for the narcissist's transformation. They continue forward, building a new life rooted in authenticity. They develop boundaries that protect their well-being, not out of hardness, but out of wisdom. They learn that saying no does not mean cruelty, it means clarity. They learn that stepping away does not mean abandoning. It means respecting both themselves and the other. And as they live in this new truth, they attract relationships that are built not on imbalance, but on mutual respect. What makes this shift so powerful is that the empath does not lose their compassion in the process. They do not become cynical or unkind. Instead, they embody a deeper kind of compassion, one that sees both the needs of others and their own needs clearly. They are no longer pulled into dynamics of control because they can recognize the signs early, and they no longer confuse suffering with love. Jordan Peterson often reminds us that growth comes from responsibility and truth. In this story, the empath embodies responsibility to self and truth in action. The narcissist, however, embodies the danger of avoiding responsibility and refusing truth. When the empath withdraws, these two paths become clear. One path leads to freedom, healing, and authenticity. The other leads to desperation, denial, and restlessness. The question remains who truly changes. The empath transforms, growing stronger, freer, wiser. The narcissist, unless they face themselves honestly, often remains the same, seeking new empaths, repeating the same cycles. But in some rare cases, the absence of the empath sparks a crisis that forces genuine reflection. And in that rare reflection, the narcissist has the chance to become more than they once were. Ultimately, the separation becomes a revelation. The empath sees their strength not in enduring, but in choosing. The narcissist sees their weakness not in being abandoned, but in never having learned to stand alone. And the dynamic that once seemed endless proves to have an ending after all, an ending that is also a beginning. For the empath, the beginning is a life lived in alignment with truth and dignity. For the narcissist, the beginning is either another cycle of illusion or, if chosen, the difficult road of self-discovery. Either way, both are forced into transformation, and though their paths may never meet again, each journey reveals the hidden power of choice, the weight of responsibility, and the cost of truth.